The airport was louder than anything I had ever known, yet somehow it could not drown the fragile sound of my own heart cracking piece by piece as I stood near the entrance holding my small bag and my one-way ticket, feeling as though I was leaving behind not just a house but an entire lifetime of memories. My son Ion had just dropped me off and he had not even stepped out of the car. His eyes were fixed on his phone as if whatever was on that screen mattered more than the woman who had given him everything. He said, "Amy, I am getting late. Just call me when you land." And I smiled because that is what mothers do. We hide the storms inside us so our children can walk in sunlight. I told him, "Take care, Beta," and for a second, I thought he might look at me properly or say something more, something that would make me feel like I still mattered, but he simply nodded, distracted, and drove away. Before I could say anything else, I stood there watching the car disappear into the traffic until it became just another moving shadow, and in that moment I felt something inside me loosen, as if a thread that had tied me to this world had quietly snapped. I adjusted my shawl and walked inside the airport. Each step felt heavier than the last because this was not just a journey, this was an ending. I had told everyone that I was going to stay with my sister abroad for a few months, but the truth was much deeper and much lonelier. I did not know if I would ever come back because there was nothing left for me here. Or at least that is what I had convinced myself. The check-in process felt mechanical. I handed over my documents, answered questions, and followed instructions like a person moving through a dream. My mind kept drifting back to Ion as a little boy, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine, his laughter echoing through the house, the way he would run to me after school and tell me everything as if I was his entire world. I remembered the nights I stayed awake when he had fever, placing a cool cloth on his forehead, whispering prayers under my breath, promising God that I would take every pain meant for him. I remembered selling my jewelry quietly so he could go to a better college, telling him it was an investment, not a sacrifice. I remembered choosing his happiness over my own again and again until I forgot what it meant to live for myself. And now here I was leaving quietly because somewhere along the way I had become unnecessary. I reached the waiting area near the boarding gate and sat down, my hands resting on my lap as I watched families around me hugging, laughing, making promises to stay in touch. Their voices filled the air with warmth that felt foreign to me. Now I looked at my ticket again as if it might give me some kind of answer, but it was just a piece of paper like my place in my son's life, something official yet strangely empty. I told myself this was for the best, that maybe distance would make things easier for both of us, that maybe he needed space to live his life without feeling responsible for me, but deep down I knew that was not the full truth. The truth was painful and simple. I had been slowly pushed out of his life and I had accepted it because I did not want to be a burden. The announcement for boarding echoed through the hall and people began to line up. I stood up slowly. My legs felt unsteady as if they were unsure of this decision. I took a step forward and then another, trying to silence the voice inside me that kept asking why. Why was I the one leaving? Why was I the one giving up everything again? And then suddenly I felt someone close to me, so close that I could feel their presence before I even turned, and then a voice, low and firm, whispered near my ear, "Do not get on that plane." I froze, my breath caught in my throat, and I turned sharply to see a middle-aged man standing beside me. He looked ordinary, yet there was something in his eyes that felt unsettling, like he knew something I did not. I frowned and said, "I am sorry, what did you say?" And he did not hesitate. He repeated it calmly, "You should not go." There was no aggression in his voice, no fear, just a quiet certainty that made my heart beat faster. I asked him, "Do I know you?" And he shook his head. "No, but I know what is waiting for you if you leave." His words sent a chill down my spine, and I felt a sudden wave of unease wash over me. I tried to dismiss it, thinking he must be confused or mistaken. I said, "I think you have the wrong person," but he looked straight into my eyes as if searching for something and said, "Your son did not bring you here out of love. He brought you here because he needed you gone." For a moment, everything around me faded, the voices, the announcements, the movement. It was as if time itself had paused, and I could only hear the echo of his words. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, and I shook my head, instinctively saying that is not true, but my voice lacked conviction even to my own ears, because somewhere deep inside me a small, fragile part of me had already started to fear that possibility. The man did not argue. He simply said, "Check your phone." His tone was gentle but firm, as if he knew that the truth would speak for itself. My hands began to tremble as I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I unlocked it slowly, my fingers hesitant, my heart pounding so loudly I thought others might hear it. And then I saw it, a notification, a message that I had not noticed before. It was from Ion. My breath hitched as I opened it and read the words that would change everything. "She is leaving today. Once she is gone, we can finalize the house transfer." I stared at the screen, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. My vision blurred as tears filled my eyes, and I read it again, hoping I had Misunderstood, hoping there was some mistake, but the words remained the same, cold, clear, and undeniable. It felt as if the ground beneath me had disappeared and I was falling into an endless void. My son, my own son, had planned this. He had brought me here not out of care but out of convenience, not to help me start a new chapter, but to erase me from his own life. My knees felt weak, and I had to grip the back of a chair to steady myself. The man stepped back, giving me space, as if he understood that this was a moment I had to face alone. I looked up at him, my eyes filled with shock and pain, and he simply said, "I told you," and then, without waiting for a response, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd, leaving me standing there surrounded by people, yet completely alone, holding a truth that shattered everything I believed in. The boarding announcement continued, but I could no longer hear it. All I could hear was the sound of my own heart breaking as I realized that the journey I thought I was taking was never really about leaving a place. It was about being left behind by the one person I thought would never let me go. I could not breathe as I stood there with my phone still blowing in my trembling hands. The message burned into my eyes as if it had carved itself into my soul, and no matter how many times I blinked, it refused to disappear. It felt unreal, like a cruel dream that I would wake up from any second, but the cold floor beneath my feet and the noise of the airport around me reminded me that this was not a dream. This was my reality. My son, my own flesh and blood, had planned my absence like it was a task to be completed, something to check off his list. Once I was gone, everything would be easier. He had written easier for whom? I wondered, because for me it felt like the world had just collapsed into nothing. I slowly lowered myself into a nearby chair, afraid that my legs would give up on me completely if I tried to stand any longer. My chest felt tight, each breath shallow and uneven, as if the air itself had become too heavy to carry the weight of my pain. I stared at the screen again, hoping for some explanation, some second message that would undo the damage, but there was nothing, just silence wrapped around those few words that had destroyed years of love and trust. Tears began to fall quietly, at first slipping down my cheeks without sound, but soon they came faster, heavier, until I could no longer hold them back. Yet even in that moment I tried to remain composed, because I had spent a lifetime teaching myself how to cry without being seen, how to break without making a sound. Memories began to flood my mind, uninvited, relentless. I saw Ion as a child running through the house, his laughter echoing in every corner, calling out for me as if I was his entire world. I remembered the way he used to hold my hand so tightly when we crossed the road, afraid to let go, as if he believed I could protect him from everything. I remembered the nights I stayed awake beside his bed when he was sick, whispering prayers under my breath, promising that I would take every pain meant for him. I remembered how I worked tirelessly to give him the life he deserved, sacrificing my own dreams, my own desires, telling myself that his happiness was enough for me. And now I sat here alone in a crowded airport, realizing that somewhere along the way that love had turned into something else, something unrecognizable, something that had pushed me out of his life as if I was no longer needed. I asked myself again and again, where did I go wrong? Was I too soft, too forgiving? Did I give too much of myself until there was nothing left to respect? Or maybe the truth was even harder to accept. Maybe I did nothing wrong. Maybe love alone is not enough to shape a kind heart. Maybe people change. Maybe they forget the hands that raised them once they learn to stand on their own. The thought cut deeper than anything else, because it meant that all my sacrifices, all my silent struggles had led me to this moment of abandonment. I wiped my tears, slowly trying to steady myself as I looked around. People continued with their journeys, unaware of the storm inside me. Families hugged, children laughed, announcements played, life moved on as if nothing had happened. But for me, everything had changed in a single moment. I felt invisible, like I had already disappeared from the world, just as my son had planned. I looked down at my ticket, still clutched in my hand. The ink on it seemed meaningless now, just a destination without purpose. I thought about boarding the plane anyway, doing exactly what he wanted, leaving quietly without confrontation, without questions, disappearing from his life so he could move forward as he wished. Perhaps it would be easier this way. Perhaps I could start over somewhere far away, where no one knew me, where no one could hurt me like this again. But then another thought crept in, slow and steady. Why should I be the one to leave? Why should I be the one to carry the weight of his betrayal? Why should I disappear from my own life just to make things convenient for someone who had already decided I no longer belonged? The idea settled in my chest like a spark, small but powerful, and for the first time since reading that message, something inside me shifted. The pain was still there, sharp and unbearable, but beneath it there was something else, something stronger, a quiet awakening. I realized that I had spent years shrinking myself to fit into a space where I was no longer valued. I had accepted neglect as normal, silence as peace, distance as understanding. But this was different. This was not just distance, this was deliberate. This was a choice he had made to remove me from his life, and that realization changed everything. My tears slowed as I took a deep breath, trying to gather the pieces of myself that had shattered. Moments ago I was still hurt, still broken, but I was no longer willing to accept this as my fate. I thought about the house, the home I had built with years of love and effort, every corner filled with memories, every wall holding a piece of my life, and now he wanted to take that. To not just my presence, but my past, my identity, my existence reduced to an obstacle in his path. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This was not just about leaving, this was about losing everything, and for the first time in my life I questioned why I had always been the one to give up, why I had always been the one to walk away quietly, to avoid conflict, to keep peace at any cost. But what peace had it brought me? What had all those sacrifices led to? Accept this moment of betrayal. I closed my eyes for a second, letting the realization settle deep within me, and when I opened them again, something had changed. The fear was still there, the pain was still there, but they no longer controlled me. I stood up slowly, holding my bag firmly as if grounding myself in the present. The boarding announcement echoed again, calling passengers to line up, but I did not move toward the gate. Instead, I took a step back, then another. My heart pounded, with each step not out of fear but out of determination. I was not running away anymore. I was not leaving my life behind because someone else had decided I was no longer part of it. I walked away from the gate, ignoring the curious glances of strangers. As I made my way toward the exit, each step felt heavier yet stronger, as if I was reclaiming something I had lost long ago, my dignity, my voice, my place in my own story. I did not know exactly what I would do next, how I would face Ion, or what words I would say, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I was not going to disappear quietly. I was not going to let him erase me from his life without facing the truth. I had given him everything, and if he had chosen to betray that love, then he would have to look me in the eye and acknowledge it. I stepped out of the airport into the open air, the noise fading behind me, replaced by a strange silence that felt both unfamiliar and empowering. For the first time in years, I was not thinking about what someone else needed or expected from me. I was thinking about myself, about what I deserved, about what I was no longer willing to tolerate. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool air as if I was breathing in a new beginning. The pain was still there, a constant ache in my chest, but it no longer felt like weakness. It felt like fuel, something that would drive me forward instead of holding me back. I adjusted my shawl, lifted my head, and walked toward the taxi stand with a quiet resolve settling in my heart. If my son wanted me gone, then he would have to face me first, because this time I was not leaving. This time I was coming back. I did not call Ion. I did not send a message or give any hint that I had changed my mind, because something inside me told me that this moment needed silence, not explanation, the kind of silence that reveals truth rather than hiding it. I stepped into a taxi and gave the driver my address, my voice steady, even though my heart was still carrying the weight of everything I had just discovered. The city outside the window moved as it always did, people rushing, lights changing, life continuing without pause. Yet for me, every second felt stretched, heavy, filled with thoughts that refused to settle. I kept replaying the message in my mind, each word cutting deeper than before. She is leaving today. Once she is gone, we can finalize the house transfer. It sounded so simple, so planned, so final, as if my existence had been reduced to a single obstacle that needed to be removed. I wondered how long this had been going on, how many conversations had happened behind my back, how many decisions had been made without me knowing, and the thought made my chest tighten again. But this time I did not let the pain consume me completely, because alongside it there was something else growing, something stronger, a quiet determination that I had never allowed myself to feel before. The taxi stopped in front of the house, and for a moment I just sat there staring at it. The place that had once been my safe space now felt unfamiliar, almost distant, as if it belonged to someone else. I paid. The driver stepped out and stood at the gate, my hand resting lightly on the metal as memories rushed back uninvited. I remembered planting flowers in the small garden, watching them bloom season after season. I remembered waiting by the door for Ion to come home from school, his face lighting up when he saw me as if I was the center of his world. I remembered laughter echoing through the rooms, moments of warmth that now felt like they belonged to another life. I pushed the gate open slowly and walked inside, each step measured, each breath controlled. I did not go to the front door. Instead, I moved toward the side entrance, the one that was rarely used, the one that still had a spare key hidden where I had left it years ago. My fingers found it easily, as if guided by memory and habit, and for a brief moment I hesitated, not because I was afraid, but because I knew that once I stepped inside, nothing would ever be the same again. I unlocked the door quietly and slipped inside the house. The air felt familiar yet heavy, carrying a tension that I could not ignore. I closed the door behind me gently, making sure not to make a sound, and that was when I heard voices coming from the living room. I froze instinctively, my heart beginning to race again, not out of fear but out of anticipation. I recognized Ion immediately. His voice was clear, confident in a way that felt different from how he spoke to me, and there was another voice too, a woman, calm yet firm, and as I listened the pieces began to fall into place. Once she is out of the country, everything becomes Easier, the woman said, her tone practical, almost detached, and Ion responded, I know, I have already spoken to the lawyer. My breath caught in my throat as the reality of their words settled over me. This was not a misunderstanding, this was not a mistake, this was a plan carefully discussed and agreed upon. They were not just waiting for me to leave, they were preparing to move forward without me completely erasing my presence from their lives, as if I had never been there at all. A sharp pain spread through my chest, but I did not step back, I did not turn away. Instead, I felt something inside me steady itself, something that refused to break any further. I took a step forward, then another, until I reached the entrance of the living room and stood there looking at them. They both froze the moment they saw me. The color drained from Ion's face, his eyes widening in shock as if he had just seen a ghost. Amy, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, and the woman beside him looked equally stunned, her expression shifting from confusion to unease. I thought she, the woman began, but could not finish her sentence. I stepped fully into the room, my gaze fixed on my son, the same boy I had raised, the same person who had just planned to remove me from his life, and I said calmly, left was that the plan. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, filled with everything that had been said and everything that had been hidden. Ion struggled to speak, his lips parting and closing as if he could not find the right words. Amy, it is not what you think, he finally said, but his voice lacked strength, lacked truth, and I could see it clearly. Then explain it to me, I replied, my tone steady, because right now it looks exactly like betrayal. The woman crossed her arms, stepping slightly forward, as if to defend herself for him. We were just trying to move forward, she said, her voice firm, but there was a hint of defensiveness in it that did not go unnoticed. Move forward, I repeated softly, by throwing me away. The words hung in the air, heavier than anything else, and for a moment no one spoke. Ion looked down, unable to meet my eyes, and that hurt more than anything. His silence, his inability to deny it, confirmed everything I needed to know. I nodded slowly, feeling a strange calm wash over me, as if the storm inside me had finally settled into something quieter, something clearer. I see, I said, and for the first time since I had walked into the house, I allowed a small smile to appear on my face, not out of happiness, but out of understanding, and that confused them more than anger ever could. They expected tears, they expected shouting, they expected me to break, but I had already done that at the airport. What stood before them now was someone different, someone who had seen the truth and accepted it. Ion looked up at me, his eyes searching my face as if trying to understand what I was thinking, what I would do next. Amy, please listen, he said, taking a step toward me, but I raised my hand, gently stopping him. There was nothing left to explain, because the truth had already been spoken, not just in words, but in actions and plans made without me, and decisions that had already been taken. I looked around the room, taking in the familiar surroundings that now felt distant. The sofa where we had once sat together, the walls that held our family pictures, the space that had once been filled with warmth now felt cold, almost hollow, as if it had already begun to let go of me. And in that moment I realized something important. I was not the one losing this home, they were losing me. I turned my gaze back to Ion and said quietly, I will not stop you. And the surprise on his face was immediate, almost visible, as hope flickered in his eyes, thinking that I would step aside quietly, that I would make things easy for him, just as I always had. But he did not yet understand that this was not the same as before, that I was no longer the woman who would silently accept whatever was given to her. I stood there for a moment longer, letting the silence speak louder than any words, and then I took a slow breath, preparing myself for what would come next, because this was no longer just about betrayal. This was about what I chose to do with it, and for the first time in my life I was ready to choose myself. I stood there in the middle of the living room looking at my son and the woman beside him, and for the first time in my life I did not feel small. I did not feel the need to explain myself or justify my existence, because something inside me had finally settled into a quiet strength that no one could shake. I could see the confusion in their eyes, the uncertainty, the expectation that I would either break down or forgive them instantly, because that is what I had always done. I had always chosen peace over confrontation, silence over truth, sacrifice over self-respect, but not anymore. This time something was different. This time I had seen the truth with my own eyes, and there was no way to unsee it. I took a slow breath and spoke calmly, I will not stop you, and the words hung in the air, creating a strange pause that neither of them knew how to respond to. Ion looked at me carefully, as if trying to read what I meant. Amy, he said softly, and for a moment his voice sounded like the little boy he used to be, but I did not let that weaken me. I raised my hand, gently stopping him before he could say anything else. It is okay, I continued. You want the house, you want your freedom, you want a life without me. I understand. The woman beside him shifted slightly, her expression changing, as if she was trying to measure the situation, trying to decide whether this was going in their favor. Ion hesitated, his lips trembling slightly as he tried to find the right words. Amy, I did not mean to hurt you, he said, but his voice lacked conviction, because deep down he knew that intention does not erase action, and I simply nodded as if acknowledging his words without truly accepting them. I already signed the papers, I said calmly, and for a brief second relief flashed across his face. His shoulders relaxed, his eyes softened as if he believed that everything had fallen into place exactly as he wanted. But that moment of relief was short-lived because I continued transferring the house to a trust. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before. His face changed instantly, the color draining as confusion replaced relief. What he whispered, as if he had not heard me correctly, a charity trust, one repeated, my voice steady, for women who were abandoned by their families. The woman stepped forward, her composure breaking for the first time. You cannot do that, she said sharply, her voice filled with disbelief and anger. But I looked at her calmly. I already did, I replied, and there was no hesitation in my tone, no room for argument, because this was not a decision made in anger, this was a decision made in clarity. Ion stared at me as if trying to understand how things had slipped out of his control, how the plan he had carefully constructed had suddenly collapsed in front of him. Amy, why would you do this? He asked, his voice shaking slightly, and I met his gaze without anger, without bitterness, just truth. Because you made me understand something, I said softly. You made me realize that I was living in a place where I was no longer wanted. And for a moment his eyes filled with something that looked like regret, but I did not allow myself to be pulled back into that emotion. I had spent too many years holding on to hope that things would change. This was not about hope anymore, this was about acceptance. I spent my whole life living for you, I continued. Every decision, every sacrifice, every moment of my life was shaped around your happiness, and I never complained because I believed that love meant giving without expecting anything in return. But somewhere along the way I forgot that I existed too. I forgot that I deserved respect. I forgot that I deserved a place in my own life. And now I remember. The room was silent again, but this silence was different. It was no longer filled with tension, it was filled with realization. Ion took a step toward me, his eyes searching mine as if he was seeing me for the first time. Amy, please, we can fix this, he said, his voice breaking slightly. But I shook my head gently. No, Beta, I replied, some things are not meant to be fixed because they are meant to teach us who we really are, and I have learned enough. I picked up my bag from the chair beside me, the same bag I had carried to the airport earlier that day, but now it felt different. It no longer carried the weight of escape, it carried the weight of choice. I walked toward the door slowly, each step steady, each movement deliberate, as if I was reclaiming every piece of myself that I had lost over the years. Where will you go? Ion asked, his voice filled with uncertainty, fear even, and I paused for a moment, my hand resting on the door handle. I did not turn back immediately because I wanted to feel that moment completely, the moment where I was no longer defined by someone else's needs or expectations. And then I turned slightly, just enough to look at him. Somewhere I am wanted, I said, and for the first time in years I smiled, not the kind of smile that hides pain, not the kind of smile that pretends everything is fine, but a real smile, one that came from a place of peace and understanding. His eyes filled with tears as the reality of the situation settled over him, the realization that he had not just lost a house or a plan, but something far more important, something that could never be replaced. I opened the door and stepped outside. The air felt different, lighter, as if the world itself had shifted to make space for me. I did not look back because there was nothing left for me behind that door, nothing that I needed to hold on to anymore. I walked forward, feeling a strange sense of freedom that I had never experienced before. It was not loud or overwhelming, it was quiet, steady, like a calm river flowing after a storm. And as I moved further away, I realized something that I had never truly understood before. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is not about hurting the people who hurt you. It is not about making them feel the same pain or regret. It is about choosing yourself. It is about walking away with your dignity intact. It is about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone reduce it to something insignificant. I had spent years believing that my strength was in how much I could endure, how much I could sacrifice, how much I could give without breaking. But now I understood that my real strength was in knowing when to stop, when to walk away, when to choose myself over everything else. And as I stepped out into the world, leaving behind the life that had once defined me, I felt something new take root inside me, not anger, not sadness, but hope, a quiet, powerful hope that this was not an ending, but a beginning, a chance to rebuild my life on my own terms, to create a future where I was not just someone else's responsibility or obligation, but a person with dreams, with desires, with a voice that finally mattered. And for the first time in a very long time, I was not afraid of what came next, because whatever it was, it would be mine, and that was enough.